Hello, Bible is History students. Here is another video for you. Since you've all done chapter 2, you're all working on chapter 3, and then there's chapter 4. Chapter 5 is really short, so I'm going to make this video kind of, just, again, talk through in general a couple of things that I really want to emphasize in chapter 2, and probably chapter 3 as well, and we'll see how it goes. I'll try to make this video no more than 20 minutes. Sorry, I just did another video, so my voice is a little out. I might have to drink my LaCroix lemon artificial soda water. I don't know. But from what I can tell, in the first two assignments, most of you are pretty much getting the idea. We're not into the actual historical questions of the Bible yet. We're still talking theory. How do you assess ancient text? Now, the reason why this is important, quite frankly, is because most scholars, when it comes to any other ancient text, they treat it the way it should be treated. But for some reason, with the biblical text, because it's the Bible, people tend to bring their own agendas into it. And that's what Provin is getting at. You have some of the more minimalist scholars dismissing the Bible out of hand because it shows creative shaping and it's ideological. So therefore we can't accept it as historical. But Provin's point, as you've seen, is every ancient text is ideological. Every ancient text is creatively shaped. Those can't be reasons for dismissing a text out of hand. Okay? And so this is why he's talking so much about testimony and points of view and bias. He's not saying you can't know anything about the past. He's saying everything we do know about the past comes through other people, their testimony about the past. So we are inevitably reliant on their testimony. Okay? So, use that analogy that I used before is the text a black curtain that prevents us from seeing the past, or is it a window that might be smudgy, but still that's the window to the past? He's saying that's how we need to see it. And to do that, we need to put our thinking caps on and really go through the text and analyze it and use our critical thinking skills and use archaeology and other things, but we can't just knee-jerk reaction throw the text out as unreliable. That's not what scholars should be doing, okay? And so, like you saw in my responses to you all for chapter 2, that's kind of what he's getting at. When it talks about this modern notion ever since the Enlightenment that there can be a scholarly, objective observer of history, it's impossible. You can be, as a human being, you can be objective to varying degrees, but since you're a human being, you're always going to see something from a point of view, no matter what it is. Good Lord, take modern politics, for example. Good thing this is on video because we're not going to get in an argument. But depending on your political leanings, the way you have viewed certain things in American history over the last couple of years really is kind of shaped, whether you like it or not, by your political leanings. And it's really hard to get around them because you see things through a certain lens. So now Provin is saying there's certain things you can do to try to be as objective as possible, but you will never get completely unbiased because it's impossible. I have certain points of view that certain politicians, no matter what they do, I'm just not going to like them. And other politicians, even though they do bad things, I kind of like these guys. Same thing, okay? Whether it's events today or history, we have to acknowledge that. That's the point. We're always going to have that, but the best way forward is to first acknowledge that I'm coming at this from a certain point of view, okay? Doesn't mean my point of view is automatically wrong, or I should be blindly accepting my point of view, or you should be blindly accepting my point of view. But we all have a point of view, and maybe we should consider what others say and what others write about the past, and maybe that can get us closer to a better understanding of history. That's kind of what he's basically saying in chapter 2. Let me see if I want to mention any other things. Again, you can see what I've written on your assignment, so there's no need to go through that. Number 3, he mentions this whole idea of is history as a science or history as art. He says viewing history as a science, it was a big Enlightenment thing. That's problematic because human beings have independent wills and you can't predict what they're going to do. You know, with science, whether it's astronomy or biology, there are certain laws of nature that happen that you can scientifically see and predict. That's fine for science. But human beings, history, isn't that deterministic. And so therefore, we can use certain scientific methods to ascertain the reliability of certain texts, better or worse. But when it comes to human history, it comes to us in the form of testimony and story, history as art. Doesn't mean it's not scientific or science can't help understand it better, but we're wrong to think that a study of history, or in this case a study of the biblical text, has to be scientific because human beings do different things. I mean, what would have happened if, what would have happened if a certain, let's see, what's a good example? Oh my gosh, I'm a Cub fan. Back in 2003 when they choked with the Bartman ball. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. If you're a sports fan, there was a foul ball. Moises Alou came to try to jump into the stands to catch it, and Steve Bartman knocked the ball away. It was a foul ball. To this day, I think if Moises Alou had not blown up and blown a gasket being upset, the Cubs probably would have won that game. But he did that, and it spooked everybody, and then they lost the game. That you can't predict that scientifically. It's a human event, a human interaction, and what human beings do always cause the cause of events to change. So when you look at human history, if you say, oh, that person would never have done that. Well, not necessarily. So that anyway, that just goes into the theory of how we do history. It comes to us in the form of testimony and story, and because it's human beings, science cannot encapsulate everything. Just to clarify, because I didn't write responses for this one, when he talked about the intellectual ostrich and the postmodern response, basically what he's saying there is when it comes to this acknowledgement of what I've just been talking about, some people, we can kind of call them uber fundamentalists, they'll just stick their heads in the ground and deny that there's problems and just, no, the Bible is just exactly the way it happened, no questions asked, I'm just going to believe it that way. You're not really wrestling with the scholarly issues if you do that. By contrast, if you're what he calls the postmodern response, is where you say, because it has a point of view, you can't know anything for certain about history, that takes it too far the other way. You don't want to be either one. You want to come to the text, read what it says, do the best you can to understand what it is saying in the story it is shaped and the history it is reflecting, but realizing it's telling you about history from a certain point of view. Okay. When he talks about archaeology, that's another important thing. Archaeology is very important. It helps clarify a lot of things, but as he says, it cannot be the high court of whether or not something is true or not. Archaeology is fragmentary. I mean, if I could use an example, here's this book. Let's say this represents all of biblical history. What we actually have in archaeological remains is maybe a little fragment. There's a lot more that archaeology can't even address. So therefore, even though it's helpful, and it's extremely helpful to give a bigger general cultural, background and stuff, without the story, without the testimony, you wouldn't even have a context around which to interpret the archaeology. And so therefore, that's what he's talking about. Okay, epistemological openness, it's just basically Proven's way of saying when we come to the text, just because they're the Bible, doesn't mean you automatically blindly believe everything it says out of hand, or you automatically dismiss it. You need to wrestle with the text and do the best you can. That's what he means. Don't reject it out of hand. All right. Now, chapter 3, you're doing this right now, and since this is only 10 minutes, I'm going to talk you through some chapter 3 stuff as well. The first thing he talks about, I'll just give this to you. The Meyer-Sternberg, he's a biblical scholar. This is another thing we need to consider, is that in the ancient world, the Hebrews were obsessed with history. in a very real way, we can say that the Hebrews, the ancient Israelites, invented history writing. In the ancient world, the pagans didn't do history. They didn't write history because human beings were worthless. From the pagan worldview, the only thing that mattered were stories of the gods, the myths of the gods, and the annals of the kings, because the kings were sons of God, and therefore their victories were important to record. But if for the mass of humanity, who cares? But what you get in the Old Testament, and we're so used to it, we forget how unusual it is. We have purportedly historical stories about a nomad named Abraham and his family. And then stories all throughout the Old Testament about individuals doing things in history. And the claim is that their God interacts with them in history. That's not done in the ancient world, really. So that's an important thing to realize, because when we come to the Old Testament, therefore, we can't just dismiss it out of hand. It's like, oh, it's not history because we don't have archaeological evidence for every single thing. The very basis for writing it lends something to that. They're trying to write history about real human beings. He also talks about the verification method and the falsification method, or the principle. Some scholars, when they come to the text, they have the idea that unless we find archaeological evidence to support this part of the text, verify it, we're not going to accept it as historical. And Proven basically says that's not the way to go because, first of all, archaeology is very fragmented. There's not a lot of it to begin with. Instead, what he suggests is the falsification principle, is that you come to the text with a general openness to it's talking about history, but if you find something in archaeology or some other aspect that proves something didn't happen, falsifies it, then yeah, we can discount it as history. But if we only accept things that can be verified by archaeology, we'd have to get rid of 95% of world history anyway. So he says that's not a good thing. Just because it's the Bible, you shouldn't go that extreme. So that's kind of an important thing he talks about. Let me see here. He talks about testimonial chains. I'll let you figure that out. Oral tradition. His point with testimonial chains and oral tradition is that even though most of the books in the Bible weren't written down in their final form until the time of the exile, which would be like the 6th century, oral tradition had kept a lot of these stories alive for hundreds of years. And just because it's oral tradition does not mean it's not trustworthy. In fact, oral tradition was done in a way to kind of ensure that the story remained accurate. Okay? But he'll talk about that in chapter 3. He then talks about certain things like in Joshua 1 through 11, 1 Kings 2 through 11, and the account of Saul, how the very way in which they're written and shaped has parallels to other things in other ancient writings, the same kind of formulas, so that kind of lends to its credibility. So yeah, let me see here. He also talks about, even though it was a highly oral tradition society, ancient Israel did show a lot of signs of literacy. So that, again, supports the reliability of the texts. And then he talks a little bit more about actual archaeological stuff that number 11, look at that. He once again talks about archaeology, and oh my gosh, this is a long chapter for you. Good thing I'm helping you with it. He talks a lot more about archaeology, the literary art, the ideology, how that relates to the historical task. Number 15, he talks about the positivist approach. The positive approach to history is that it rejects anything in a text that doesn't conform to normal or common human experience. Proven has issues with that. I'll give you a clue. Who determines what is common human experience? If all you knew about was life here in modern America, and you read a story about some group in some other land that you never heard of who did things you never had thought to do. If you use that principle, you would just discount that completely. So that's the problem with the positivist approach is who's determining what is common human experience. You can't just dismiss a text just because it doesn't fit your experience. Anyway, that's chapter 3. And then as you go on to chapter 4, let me just talk you through a little bit of chapter 4 as well. He talks about narrative and history. And here's a fundamental picture that he makes that I think is really good. When you are reading ancient texts, you can even apply this to the Gospels. But when you're reading ancient texts in the Bible, they are not giving you a picture or a video of that history. They are painting for you a portrait of that history. And if you know anything, if a picture is a picture, that's what it is. An artist, though, if he's painting a portrait, he can paint it in a way where you recognize who the person is, but he can do the background, he can do certain other things that place that in a certain context that isn't factual history all the time, but it's still about that person. So I give the example of Sennacherib's invasion, which you can read. Sennacherib's invasion is in 2 Kings 18 to 20, 18 and 19. At the end of that siege, we're told the angel of the Lord went out and killed 185,000 Assyrian troops. Now, we read that. Are we to believe that like a literal angel came out like Rambo and started slaughtering people with a big sword? Like that literally happened? No. Or we can read that as it's like an artistic way of saying for some reason the Assyrian troops got sick, maybe died for some reason, and they viewed that as an act of God. But instead of seeing it that way, they put it in the context of a story of an angel going out and killing 185,000 Assyrians. So when you're reading that in a historical text, and we know Sennacherib invaded Judah at that time in 701 BCE, we know that happened. So it's about clearly a historical event, but we don't have to take that talk about an angel of the Lord coming out as a literal thing. It's a portrait. It's a symbolic way of saying something happened. Okay? So, anyway, keep that in mind. Let's see here. What else I want to talk about? I think, for the most part, because you guys are doing so well with the first 2 chapters, and given what I've just talked about, emphasizing the portrait analogy to doing history, I think you'll get through chapter 4 pretty well. And then chapter 5 is really short. That just kind of sums everything up. Now, so I won't do any more videos for these first 5 chapters, because you're doing really well. But remember, what you want to be doing, the thing we're going to do to summarize these 5 chapters is, after I give you feedback on your assignments and stuff, I'm going to want you to kind of write an essay in which you show me that you understand Proven's overall argument. And I'll maybe send you something a little more, like a file kind of explaining what I want more in detail. But it's really your attempt, your attempt, yeah, it's your attempt, but your opportunity to show me that you understand what he's saying in these first 5 chapters. And basically that's going to entail, this is what Proven's argument is, this is what the problems he sees, and this is what he says. And then you can also tell me your opinion of it as well. But so far you're all doing well. I think chapter 3 is due either today or tomorrow, and then just keep trucking through chapters 4 and 5. And then before you know it, we'll actually be into the biblical stuff in a week or 2. All right, thanks.